two friends taking pictures of the rising full moon on a summer night.
Two teenage kids doing what teenage kids do.
When a stranger with a gun and a death wish changed everything.
It was violent, it was senseless, and I will never understand it, I will never accept it.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and unfortunately, we're all too familiar with stories about how violence shatters lives. But what we rarely see is how they are rebuilt. In a new podcast, The Letter, we relive tragedy, but only so we can hear the rest of the story. The struggle to reclaim lives, the realities of grief, and the possibilities of forgiveness.
I believe in miracles. Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, welcome to Project Recovery. It's a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by the fine folks over at useonlyasdirected.org. They've got a 3-part solution to help with the opioid crisis. That's speak out, opt out, and throw out. And we thank them for their patronage. Is that a good word?
It's an excellent word.
Patronage?
Double points.
Sometimes in my head, I say a word and I think I know what it means,
Yeah.
and then I say it and I know I don't know what it means.
Yeah, we call that a Kelso moment at our house.
A Kelso.
From that 70s show.
Yeah, Ashton Kutcher.
Right.
I love that. Dr. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Hey, so we got a great guest today. It's Claire Groll, and you got to say it like it's Dave Grohl.
Right.
But she said it's not the coolest
Dave's
last
her
name.
brother. That's what she said.
No, she didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
Hey, before we get into this, I always like to check in with Dr. Matt.
Yeah.
And we had some great pre-podcast conversation going. And
We did.
It was Preparation H for your eyes.
I was wondering what you're going to talk about. So we talk about a lot of stuff before the show.
So here's a true story.
Right, the Preparation H for the TV people. Go ahead.
So when I was working in TV, doing mornings and drinking at night,
Right.
Mary Nichols from Channel 2 used to always say, "Hey, Casey, you packed your baggage. It's underneath your eyes." And so I'd have these puffy eyes. And it was crazy because my mom could call and she goes, "Hey, are you drinking too much? Your bags are looking
She just tell
big."
by your eyes?
She
Wow.
could tell by my
Okay.
eyes.
Yeah.
And if you really want to know, I went so far as to that's why I used to wear the black-rimmed glasses.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
because
because
kind of cover that
it
up.
would hide the bottom of the baggage.
Ah.
And then somebody once told me that Preparation H, the hemorrhoid stuff,
Right.
is good for the
I
capillaries.
mean, I don't really know.
It's good
but
for the
that's-
capillaries in the eyes. It takes down
Does the same thing.
it takes down swelling.
Takes down swelling on either end.
And so when I was married, we'd have Preparation H for the eyes and Preparation H for the butt.
Yeah, there you go.
We never wanted to mix up the tubes.
No, not for toothpaste.
No,
You
no.
Keep those in separate drawers.
Yeah. So just to let you know.
You TV guys are full of really helpful little hints.
And then you were telling me how toothpaste is good for taking off hickeys.
Is that was that me or you?
Yeah, no,
I
that
think-
was you. That was you.
That was me. Yeah.
Because I feel like you were a hickey king.
Oh no. I think I always wanted a hickey. I'm not sure I ever actually had one.
Did you ever give yourself a hickey with the vacuum?
No. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
You never be a very round hickey, don't you think?
But we used to tie my little brother down and give him hickeys with the vacuum.
Oh, I missed out on that.
Wow.
No,
Maybe
if
that
I
was
could
just
only
me.
go back.
Well, thank you for joining into Project Recovery today. We've got a great guest. Her name is Claire Groll. And Claire, you reached out to me on Facebook. You said you've got a story and you've got a mission in life. And we're going to find out about your mission towards the end of the podcast. But let's find out how Claire Groll's story began.
All right. Well, thank you again for having me. I feel like I have a little bit of a unique story, although the more people you know in recovery, the more you realize you're not unique. So that's a good lesson for me to remember. But I actually got sober at 16. So I am celebrating 21 years of sobriety in June. So getting close.
Sober at 16?
Sober at 16.
I can see you doing the math in your head there.
Yeah. I was like,
We're a lot older than her.
okay.
Yeah.
But I was really thinking the first 16 years must have been crazy for you.
Yeah, it was. So I started drinking at about 12, 7th grade, 12-ish. But I grew up in California and lived in the Bay Area. And my dad was a chef. And one morning I answered the door and he gave me some gifts and said, "Here you go. Love ya. Talk to you later." And that was the last I ever saw or heard from him. He was a heroin addict. I didn't know that at the time, obviously, because I was about 5. And so my mom and I just grew up together. She was a single mom, and she raised me alone. I'm an only child. And so we had a bit of a tumultuous adolescence and childhood. I definitely always felt the abandonment from my dad. Always felt am I good enough? If I was good enough, he wouldn't have left me. My mom was really good about easing me into what really happened.
So did you feel like in the beginning that maybe it was your fault or no?
I don't remember ever specifically feeling that. I only remember kind of feeling these like maybe fantasy stories of, well, he was just in the CIA and now he's back and everything's going to be great. Or he's a European prince and you didn't know and he's going to swoop in and come back
Which
for you.
is really very, very typical for kids, especially. You said you were 5, is that right? Mm-hmm. And in our identity development, the development of how we decide who we are, at those ages, kids are what we call egocentric, or their view is about kind of themselves, and that's normal and healthy and good. And so unfortunately, when things go wrong, if a parent leaves, does abandon their children, or parents divorce, those sorts of things, kids often ask themselves, well, if I had just been better or different or something else, maybe mom or dad would have stayed. And so that can be a lot to work through. And one of the ways kids work through it is they create sort of fantasy stories that ease the blow. So the dad's an undercover CIA agent is a weirdly common one because that would kind of explain it, and no one can really question you about it at school.
He's in the CIA.
Right, exactly. And so yeah, those are common ways that kids learn to deal with it. But as you got older, did you ease out of that, or do you feel like it still kind of was I call it a rock in your backpack? Was it something you kind of carried around with you?
No, I definitely, as I got older, my mom would tell me a little more and more age-appropriate things about the story, to the point where, it started with, well, he smoked a little weed, and then it got to, well, he did a little cocaine, and then, oh, he also did a little heroin. Oh, he was a full-on heroin addict. When he had custody of you, he'd come back with the crap beat out of him. And so it was just a really bad situation. So by the time I learned the whole story, I think, I'd gotten rid of the Amanda Bynes fairy tale of having this prince dad. And I definitely had a lot of, I'm not good enough. I don't think I necessarily drove him from leaving, but I was not good enough to stay for, maybe I felt. So I had a lot of that. It was really hard for my mom and I. She's 5'2", and I'm 5'8". So anytime she tried to discipline me, it just never went over very well.
Mom.
Right, not going to happen.
Sometimes with just two of you in the house, it's too much time to focus on each other, right? There aren't
absolutely.
other kids to get mom's attention. There aren't two parents to tag team the kids.
Yes, and she was a working mom, so she wouldn't come home until 5 or 6. So I was on my own after school, and a latchkey child, as she used to tell me they called it. So I had a lot of free time, which in the Bay Area of California, sometimes a lot of free time can lead to some shenanigans. So it actually all started pretty bad. The first time I drank, my drug of choice is 40s.
Oh, yeah.
So,
a little oldie.
A little oldie. Anything that, St. Ives, anything that was cheap enough that I could steal or collect my coins for and go buy.
For some of the Mormon moms out there wondering what a 40 is.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, a 40 is a malt liquor in a 40-ounce bottle. And the thing is you normally can get them for $2 to $3. And so a lot of times when you see panhandlers or people out there, you might not be able to get $9 for a 12-pack, but you can always find $2 for a 40.
For a 40, yeah. I'm just trying to picture a 12-year-old little blonde-haired cute girl with a 40.
Oh, sometimes I don't have any daughters. I think it was for a reason. But yeah, so my preference was 40s. I think my first night it was Miller High Life, and I got so drunk there was no way I could go home.
Let me ask you this: 14 or 13, how are you getting 40s?
Well, there were a couple liquor stores in my hometown that all you had to do was have a laminated card that said you were 21, and I guess they believed you. A lot of older siblings, probably.
I remember being a kid, and this isn't a joke, when my mom used to smoke cigarettes, she could send us down to the local 7-Eleven with a note that said, hey, I'm buying these cigarettes for my mom.
Right.
And then when we were about in 8th grade, we were like, hey, I got pretty good at forging her signature.
I'm sure there are still places like that, but I think back in the 80s and the 90s, there were a lot more places like that.
Yeah. I don't think it would be... It's hopefully not as hard here in Utah. And I don't think it would even be that easy in California anymore.
So when you took that first drink, walk us through that. I mean, were you did somebody instigate you to doing that? Did you
Yes,
seek
there was
it?
definitely a lot of pressure to fit in. Part of my story is I can say I remember feeling different even in the sandbox. Even in preschool, I can remember something feeling not the same. I never identified it as maybe that I was living in an abandoned home or a single parent home, but I always felt different. So I was always looking for how to easily fit in. And to me, drinking seemed like the best solution for that. Instantly, you had a crowd of people who were just as rebellious as you and just as party fun seeking as you. I actually got 3 of my really good friends suspended. 2 of them didn't talk to me for about 10 years after the incident, but suspended in 7th grade for drinking vodka at school. So I really went at it hard. When you start at 12 and you quit by 16, I feel like I knew I wouldn't have lived if I had another drink. And it was that simple for me.
Were you introduced to an older crowd of kids at age 12? Like, how did at age 12 did you get that in your head that you wanted to drink?
People were doing it in my school. There was enough of them that I just found
Same
them.
age kids, 7th, 8th graders, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I really didn't have older friends yet. I mean, definitely by high school, I was hanging out with the older kids, but in middle school, it was just us and the middle schoolers.
And I think for a lot of people who never did that sort of thing in junior high, they don't realize how common that is still to this day.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of kids who 10, 11, 12 are smoking weed and drinking because, maybe they have an older sibling or it's just available or
they've seen it in the movies.
That sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And so at 12, you're starting to party, you're partying with your friends. Had you ever gotten any real trouble besides, did you get suspended as well?
I got suspended as well.
How did your mom handle that?
She was a wreck. She was distraught. She was 5'2". She just had very little control over me, very little parental influence over me. So I know she was a wreck, but I just steamrolled past it and just kept going. I got brought home by the police multiple times. If I was too drunk to go home, I spent the night under someone's futon because we're all 12, 13, 14.
You could fit under a futon back then, right?
Yeah, I couldn't now. Yeah. But I just would find a place to sneak and hide, and then a police officer would pick me up the next morning. The culture of my town, it wasn't the 80s. It was the 90s. But
I know. I threw the 80s in there for
us.
For Casey and I.
Yeah.
But the culture of my town was very unique compared to today because the police would bring me home, and I remember this DARE officer came over. He was everyone's friend, the friendly cop. And he came over and he sat me down and he sat my mom down and he said, look, your daughter is hanging out with boys who are older, who are driving, who are in high school. And this is what she's doing. This is the viaduct she's doing it under. These are the activities that she's involved with. These are the things these boys do to her when she's drinking. You better get better control of her.
So he basically gave him your playbook.
Yeah. And I didn't think to myself, but now as I look back at that situation, I think, you're the police. You know she's 5'2" and I'm 5'8". Why are you telling her to control me when clearly she doesn't have the control over me? There were times when these boys would come pick me up in their car and she'd be running after me saying, don't go. But they just picked me up and we just left. She had unfortunately very little ability to control me at the time.
Which seems so crazy because I'm looking at her. You're so prim and proper,
I know.
I've changed a lot in 20 years.
But you seem like the ultimate bad girl.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have scars on my forehead from falling down, blacked out, drunk in the Bay Area. I mean, there's this one street I grew up on, San Pablo Avenue, which is a lot like State Street, I fell down, passed out drunk, and I think my friends just kept going. And I was in the middle of the road and the police had to come get me, and they didn't know who I was. So it was going to be one of those Jane Doe situations until finally someone got enough courage to come back and say, okay, we know who she is. We know who she belongs to.
So from 12 to 16, it seems like you lived a pretty crazy life.
I crammed in my experience in recovery. No one's ever been rude, but a lot of people ask, how do you know if you're an alcoholic if you quit at 16?
Well, I was thinking that too.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like because it had to be at 15. You
Right.
said I'm an alcoholic.
Right. Well, no, it was 16 that I quit. So it took me I'll get into that, but it took me a while to figure out there was a problem. I did try to quit every once in a while because I was shaking at that time. I mean, I'm a sophomore in high school shaking because I need a drink.
So you were a daily drinker?
I was a daily drinker. I was a blackout drinker, which to my understanding is a really big indication that the chemicals in your brain are not processing alcohol anymore and you might be an alcoholic.
And that's the way most young kids drink. You know, most kids who are 12 don't drink, as Casey would say, like a gentleman.
Yeah.
Right? They drink to get blackout drunk. And so that
Who's
was something.
winning this one? Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Go big or go home. And it sounds like you were going big every day.
Yeah. Every day. Every day, I finally got kicked out of my regular high school and put into a continuation high school.
And was that because you were drinking at school so often, or?
It must have been. I don't exactly remember
They
the
just
details.
didn't want to deal
but
with you
yeah,
anymore, it sounds
I think I was high in class and with marijuana, and I think I was drunk after school and definitely smoking on campus. And
So now you've gone from alcohol to marijuana. Were you using any other drugs in between there? Were you as a equal opportunity user?
I am so grateful I was never introduced to other drugs. My mom was very, very good at educating me about my history. And I thought, well, if my dad's a heroin addict, I'll just drink and I'll just smoke weed and it'll be fine. And so although she was so great about educating me about my background and addiction being a family disease, I just thought alcohol was the exception. So I do remember one time seeing cocaine in the high school locker room and just losing my mind. How could you sell that to people? It ruins lives. It ruins families. So I did have, at that time, enough awareness to know to stay away from harder
So that
drugs.
seems scary to you at that young age.
I had my limits at that
But you
young
kind of felt
age.
like, oh, but alcohol and weed, they're okay.
Blacking out and falling down on the street and getting left was okay.
Yeah, that was fine. That was normal. Right.
Hey, you're listening to Project Recovery. We're going to find out about Claire's rock bottom right after these.
I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. Don't miss Cold's new Season 3, where I look into the unsolved disappearance of Cherie Warren, a woman last seen leaving her job at a Salt Lake City office in 1985. Police cast suspicion on Cherie's estranged husband and boyfriend, but never made any arrests or recovered Cherie's remains. Find Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, anywhere you get your podcasts.
So, Claire, you're in high school. You just got kicked out. You're going to an alternative education. How does that look for you? What is a day and day for you?
So, great question. I finally got kicked out of the alternative high school as well. I think I just quit going mostly. I would wake up at around 9 or 10, leave the house, and go try to find somebody hanging out on the local street corner who would buy me alcohol and hang out with me. So one morning, I used to say I got in a fight with the cops, but now I realize that it was an intentionally set up altercation with my mom. So she had tried to get me help. I had been in one rehab in California, but you couldn't lock the door on teenagers. Someone stole my Newports. I threatened to kill them and got kicked out of that one. So she had tried her best to get me some help, but she'd be driving me down to a rehab or the police station, and she'd tell me her plan, and I would jump out of the moving car. That's how it wasn't happening. So one morning I woke up at around 9 or 10 to go find my alcohol, and the police were outside, and my mom said, "You need to go to school." And I told her where to go. The police intervened. It turned into a physical altercation. I definitely was in fight or flight and punched and swore at some of the police officers, and they threw me in the back of the car and took me to juvenile hall in Alameda County, California. So this was approaching a bottom for me. By this time, I had some assessments. I mentioned I was in a different rehab, and I'd had some assessments where I thought to myself, I'm going to be really honest. We're in Berkeley, California. My drinking is normal. Everybody's doing it. It's great. So I had told them honestly, I'm drinking 3 40s a day, and then whatever hard alcohol comes after that. And, are you missing periods of time? Yeah, but that's fine, So I had this idea, and I remember being really honest with one assessment and them saying, "Oh, sorry, you actually do have some problem drinking." And I was shocked because I thought, oh, that backfired. I thought they were going to tell my mom to ease up and lay off and everything was going to be
You thought
fine.
they would hear 340s a day plus some liquor, and they'd be like, oh, it's no big deal?
It's no big deal. Everybody's doing it.
She's 15.
I
love
legitimately thought that.
One of my very favorite things is working with teenagers because there's that mentality of invincibility, and you're so seeing things only from your own point of view. And so I'm sure you thought your story was whatever you thought it was, and you probably were shocking some of the people that were trying to give you some help.
So a counselor tells you, I think you're an alcoholic.
I think you might be an alcoholic. So I'm in juvenile hall, and I am still just mad as anything. My mom would drive out to visit me, and I'd say nope and sit in my cell. I had no intentions of changing anything. I went in front of a judge, same mentality. He's going to tell my mom, lay off. She's fine. We don't have time. We don't have room to store her for drinking.
We're not a babysitter.
We're not a babysitter. So I go in front of the judge and he says, yep, your record shows you have a problem with alcohol. We're going to hold you here until a bed opens in Utah where they can lock you down and you will need treatment. So,
they, because of and for the listeners you mentioned earlier, and I think it's still the same. I don't know if it's changed, but I think at age 14, you could just sign yourself out of any rehab center.
In California, they couldn't touch you.
Yeah,
and they couldn't lock a door.
Yeah.
At the time.
Right, so you could just walk out.
So I just walked out multiple times,
But
but in California,
has...
or in Utah, they could lock the door on you. And my mom is actually from Salt Lake, so she had some family out here, so it was a good fit. So same thing, I just thought, oh my gosh, everyone keeps telling me I have a problem. What is wrong with everybody? And in my juvenile hall, we were the white women. The white girls were the minority. There was only one other one. And I guess there's an unspoken rule that there can only be one white girl in juvenile hall. And she jumped me from behind and it turned into a big fight on the yard. And because I had an aggressive record, I was pepper sprayed as the aggressor. So
So the other white girl jumped you.
The other white girl started it.
Right.
But I got the...
Pepper spray.
I got the pepper spray.
I've been pepper sprayed.
It is the worst pain I've ever been in my life.
It sucks.
It sucks. I was crying out of every part of my face. My ears were running. My nose was running just like tears out of my mouth.
Like a waterfall.
Like a waterfall. So they dragged me down to intake. I am flooding my cell, just trying my best to get this off of my face. And I hear over the loudspeaker, if anybody's interested, the God Squad is here to meet with people. And they were this cute little group of Baptist, Southern Baptist women who would come in and preach the good word. And I just was a mess. And I sat down with her and she met with me. And I can remember distinctly, maybe as I was flooding my cell with water, hearing a voice that said, this is not the course your life is supposed to be heading. And so the little lady came in and we said a prayer together. We asked for help together. She hugged me. She cried with me. That was my spiritual experience and that was my turning point. From then on, I would allow my mom to come visit me and we started to be able to talk. I spent 8 months in a residential treatment center out here in Utah.
Before we get to that, I want to go back. Before that, when was the last time that somebody hugged you and cried with you?
You know, my mom tried. There were times when I'd come home drunk and she'd be so happy I was alive that she couldn't be mad. But
what I'm saying is that you were willing to hug and have somebody love you.
Absolutely. Definitely. I mean, I was throwing plates at people's heads who were trying to hug me before that. So it was a moment for sure.
Obviously, as a kid, having that memory of your dad dropping things off on the door for you and never returning. Have you ever seen him since?
I have never seen him since, and that's another long story. Someone in his family found him and gave me a phone number, and I called him and I talked to him one time about 10 years ago, and his voice was like the voice of an angel. It was the oddest experience for me. I don't know. It didn't sound familiar, but it must have rung some chord with me. And we spoke, and I said, look, I am an alcoholic. I've been sober for, at the time, probably 10 years-ish. And I said, I understand addiction. I am not mad at you at all. I would like to meet you, to see you. I don't need a relationship with you, but I'd like to just see you, meet you, talk to you. And he agreed, and I went out to California. He was still living out there for a wedding. And I drove past his business. He was a chef. So I drove past his restaurant and stopped in to see him before this wedding. And they said, he doesn't come on shift for half an hour. he wasn't answering the phone again. After I talked to him, he just quit picking up the phone for me, so I couldn't schedule anything. So I stopped at his work. They said he'll be on in half an hour. My husband my fiance at the time was a best man in a wedding, so we had to leave. Then we drove back an hour to go to this restaurant after the wedding, and they said, oh, sorry, you missed him by a half hour. So that was the closest I ever came to meeting him. He never spoke to another member of our family after that day, so long ago when I was 5. So I feel good that I didn't meet him. He actually ended up dying of liver cancer shortly after that.
Okay.
I was
So
told.
sorry.
Yeah.
You made an effort, though.
I did make an effort.
And it was, I guess, kind of left, the ball was in his court, so to speak,
Sure.
I guess.
So you had a meeting with the Southern Baptist. She gave you a hug. You guys said a prayer.
We said a prayer. We cried together. Things really, everything kind of came together after that.
And then a bed opened up in Utah.
And a bed opened up in Utah. So 90 days in juvenile hall, 8 months in a residential treatment center out in Syracuse, Utah, which is around close to where you're from.
Yeah.
It was a great program. I had amazing therapists there.
What kind of program was it?
Well, it was a adolescent residential treatment. They did have issues like cutting there. They had alcoholism. They had adoption issues there, just general rebellious teens. But I was at home with the people there. There were others like me. And
so all of a sudden you're thrust into a home of, was it co-ed?
it was co-ed, but they separated, and it was a pretty big, it didn't have a home feel. It was a pretty big campus, but we were in units of 16 girls, and it was really, really good, really effective. I think it was a great model. It's actually shut down now. It was bought out by someone and kind of run into the ground, but there's reviews online that says it was the worst place in the world, and they threw you in a room if you were a padded room, which they did have a padded room. I was never thrown in it. But
you know what? You can find that.
Right.
You can find good and bad about any residential treatment out there.
Right.
People are going to say, oh, it was the worst place ever. And you can also find people say that was the best place ever. I think it's how you go into it, and if you're willing to accept the message, if you're willing to learn, and you really want to make a difference and you want to change.
Absolutely. If I had been thrust there before juvenile hall, it would have been a whole different story for me, and I probably would have had a different experience, but I was beaten into submission by then, with the pepper spray. The pepper spray and the other white girl.
Why? I'm still feeling a little unsatisfied with understanding why you were so angry as a kid. I understand it made just that trauma of your dad and how he left is certainly more than enough, probably. But I think in some situations, a daughter and her mom might become really close and rely on each other. What do you think? Were there other factors in your young life besides the abandonment that kind of led to this rebelliousness, or was it just kind of organic?
I think because of the fantasy of my dad as a prince in Europe and someday he's going to send for me, I think I took all of my anger out on my mom. And she did try to hold boundaries with me, and she did try to be the good parent, and she did try to instill the good value system into me. And so she was the face of my oppression.
She was the only other person there,
and
right?
she was the only person I could be mad at,
right.
And I tell people I work with all the time, daughters can be mad at their moms because their moms will always be there.
I think that's very true. I think moms, dads can get some flack from their kids for sure, but I think there's sort of a primal feeling of like, if I push it too far with dad, he might squash me.
Yeah.
But with mom,
I'm the alpha.
Yeah. But with mom, I think the primal feeling is there isn't too far. She'll always love me.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately then, moms sometimes get the brunt of a child's anger and frustration because they know mom will never give up on them.
Yeah. It was never conscious, but I think to myself now, I was never mad at him. I was sad by him. I was, inventing stories about him, but I was never mad at him. I was always mad at her, which was so displaced.
Well, it's displaced, but as a child, children are concrete. Things they don't think in the abstract very well. So he wasn't there.
Right.
He wasn't there to be mad at,
right.
And she was, and so that makes perfect sense from that developmental age. As an adult looking back, you probably think, why the heck was I mad at my mom?
Right,
she was working and taking care of me. But the reality is that, mom was there and available to be mad at. So that's who got the brunt of it.
So you celebrated your 17th birthday sober.
Yes. Yeah, I did in treatment. Yeah.
And, for someone just turning 17, they're worried about car, license, who's asking me to prom. You've got 16 years of chaos behind you.
Yeah, I have one prom I went to. And other than that, I did not have anywhere near a normal high school or college experience because of...
But what I'm wondering is what is it like to be 17 and going out where people are just starting to get in to partying, just starting to experiment, just trying to figure out who they are and what they want to be, and you already know what you don't want to be.
Right. Yeah, I graduated from Orem High School, so I never went back home after my treatment center. I moved in with a cousin in Orem and finished there, and I just never fit in with other people at Orem High, so I kept my head down. And
a lot of people could probably say that.
Probably. Well, going from Berkeley, California to Orem, Utah, that's a huge culture shock.
Like going to Pleasantville.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't, I kept to myself. I was probably a little depressed, and I didn't have a ton of resources. All I knew is do not drink, do not drink, do not drink.
What did the residential do for you, though? You said you obviously got sober and you were focused on not drinking, but you said there were good therapists there. I mean, do you feel like anything else changed when you left the residential besides the fact that you were sober? Was there any insight or?
Definite insight. They did a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy that was great. A lot of getting to know me, a lot of reinforcing of this is not the path you're supposed to be in, kind of helping me with my self-esteem. I mean, any 12-year-old who's drinking like that doesn't have a lot of self-esteem to begin with. And so they definitely helped me understand my worth and my place, and that my dad leaving had nothing to do with
who you are.
Yeah, yeah. And
were there trauma issues? I mean, kind of the way you're describing those 4 years from 12 to 16, I would wonder as a therapist, what sort of traumatic events maybe happened to you in those years.
I actually wonder that too. When my mom told me that my dad would have me for custody and then bring me back and he'd have the crap beat out of him, I thought to myself, I have zero recollection of that. Mm-hmm. And I realize at 4 or 5, we're not storing memories the way adults are, but there is nothing in my memory that I can access that tells me there was trauma.
Okay. And what about, though, like with the friends running the streets in San Francisco, all that?
Well, there was some of that, yeah. A 12-year-old drunk girl is going to experience a lot of being taken advantage of by the boys that are picking her up and giving her alcohol. So there was a lot of that. In juvenile hall, a social worker asked me if I wanted to press any rape charges, and I said, I understand I was raped many times, but I also understand I had a responsibility in that, and I'm not blaming the victim. It was not my fault, but I wanted to move past it rather than live in it, I guess. I wanted to make sure I never put myself in that situation again rather than...
But in your recovery and your therapy sessions, did you spend a good amount of time of processing that information? Because for a 12-year-old to have to go through that, and let alone a 16-year-old sobering up have to relive that, I mean, it had to be pretty trying. It was.
I mean, I haven't spoken about this openly in a while. I have 4 kids that I'm trying to raise now, and it's like looking down on myself and thinking, who is that poor girl? Like Matt, you saying the anger I'm sensing you had, where does it come from? I'm thinking the same things. And
well, that girl doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. I mean, none of us are the little person that we were when we were growing up. Whether we had good experiences or traumatic experiences, we can grow from those things, but hopefully we change over time. So in a way, that person isn't here anymore, and can be difficult to try to tap into what it was like to be that person. In relative to the rest of your life, chronologically, that was a very short period of time, but it made a huge impact on how you see things. But to try to remember being that person, that is probably so far from your current and recent experience in life that it is hard to remember why you were so angry. But, the reason that I ask about that is a lot of times people will focus on their sobriety, which of course is essential, but they forget or maybe they don't feel they have the support or whatever it may be to get in and work on the trauma that came from the experiences when they were using.
Yeah.
And a 12, 13, 14-year-old doesn't have the judgment and reason that even an older adolescent has. And we know they're kind of idiots, you know. And so when you're at that age and you're intoxicated, of course, traumatic things are going to happen to you in those situations. And I'm glad that your center, they were sensitive to that.
Absolutely.
And were willing to work with you on that.
Yeah, for some reason I was, honestly, I say blessed because I don't know another answer. I see that could...
Well, it sounds like you had a spiritual experience
Yeah.
when you were in lockup, and that probably opened up the way to having more supportive, positive experiences. Do you feel like there were some people placed in your path to help you along the way?
Absolutely. I kept in touch with my little God Squad friend for a lot of years.
Oh, good.
Yeah, a lot of. I still am great friends with a couple of the therapists that were in my treatment center. I definitely did some, fellowship meetings and things like that, and made some of the best friends of my life and had some of the best experiences. I did not have a prom. I did not have even a typical college. I never went and did I did college online, but I had some amazing experiences with other sober people in my community that I say because I got sober at 16. I was raised in some of the rooms with some of the fellowship, and it's true. It shaped who I am today. Every problem that I have currently as maybe more of a stay-at-home mom, housewife that I've been the last 10 years, I apply principles I learned through sobriety and ways and maybe my center in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, yeah, it was I had a lot of tools to get me through.
First and foremost, thank you very much, and we are honored that you would come and share your story with us. You're listening to Claire Groll here on Project Recovery. Make sure you tune into episode part 2 of this to find out what her 20s look like and what she's doing now.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.